I just want to add an addendum to what I was saying about Yahya Sinwar. Sinwar has been a long divisive figure, both within Palestinian society and in the broader Israeli Hamas conflict. And as a senior leader of Hamas, his actions and leadership sparked significant debate, particularly regarding resistance, occupation, and the dynamics of Palestinian political life. I think it's important to clarify here that I'm not trying to glorify Yahya Sinwar or his role in this conflict. Rather, just trying to highlight how his death, brought about by an Israeli military strike and this occupation, has been framed by Israel as a major success. Yet the reactions from Palestinians and others in the region suggest that the situation is far more complex. Sinwar's leadership, while central to Hamas's military strategies, is seen differently depending on one's perspectives. More critically, his death did little to shift the trajectory of the ongoing conflict, which is deeply rooted in this long-standing issue of Israeli occupation, apartheid, and the resistance against it. These are issues that are far bigger than any single person, right? And within Palestinian society, I've learned that Yahya Sinwar was a divisive figure. On one hand, he was viewed as a committed leader who resisted Israeli occupation and was an advocate for the defense of Palestinian rights, particularly through the military wing of Hamas. And then on the other hand, he is associated with violence and these punitive measures that he took against suspected collaborators, which is said to have created a sense of division among Palestinians within certain communities. I don't necessarily know if that's fully true, but I have heard enough, like people either on the ground who or know people directly on the ground who have given at least a little bit of credence to that. But others, even if they did have like fear for him or thought he was a wrongdoer or whatever, they still understood him as a necessary force in the fight against Israeli occupation and apartheid and genocide. While others might question his methods, particularly the targeting of fellow Palestinians, they're still going to see him as like a justified means to an end, right? And so despite these internal divisions, I feel like Sinwar's role as a leader in the ongoing struggle against this Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide is what made him a central figure in the broader narrative of Palestinian resistance. And this is crucial in understanding why, despite not having a universal support, many Palestinians will continue to focus on resisting the occupation rather than on the controversies surrounding Sinwar's leadership and what he did and his legacy. Palestinian resistance has historically been driven by the desire to challenge and ultimately end Israeli occupation, apartheid, and genocide, which has shaped the lives of millions of Palestinians for decades. And it's in this context, leaders like Sinwar, regardless of their divisiveness, are often seen as part of a larger movement, one that extends beyond any type of individual figure. And so Sinwar's death, while celebrated by Israel as a significant victory in this ongoing genocide against this ongoing campaign of violence against Hamas, but then also this genocide in turn against the Palestinian population. Sinwar's death, who it's not going to change the broader sentiment among Palestinians. For many, the struggle against occupation is not tied to any singular leader, but is rooted in a deep-seated desire for liberation and sovereignty. This is why, despite Sinwar's death, the resistance will not diminish. The issues that the Palestinians face, daily military incursions, displacement, economic hardship, and the continued occupation of their lands, are systemic. They cannot be addressed by removing any individual leaders, right? If Netanyahu's 86 tomorrow, it's still not going to change the overall action of the Israeli settler colonial state. And so in this sense, Sinwar's death is just another moment in a long history of resistance, and will go on with or without his leadership. From Israel's perspective, the death of Sinwar was framed as a significant military success. Sinwar is not only a senior leader in Hamas, but was also involved directly in the planning of various military operations, including October 7th. Killing such a high-profile target is portrayed as a blow to Hamas's leadership and its military capabilities. This framing does not fully capture the complexity of the situation on the ground, nor does it reflect how they showed a video of the guy dying in like the most heroic and valiant way possible that will make him a martyr and legend for life. Despite his death, I feel like Israel's military operations in Gaza will continue unabated. The ongoing bombardments, incursions, and siege of Gaza, the ongoing genocide, reflects a broader strategy that goes beyond targeting individual leaders, right? They are doing an ethnic cleansing. And so this conflict between Israel and Hamas is deeply entrenched with roots that go as far back to the Nakba, right? Did Sinwar make Israel do the Nakba? No. You know, removal of figures like Sinwar does not bring the conflict closer to resolution. If anything, it often intensifies the cycle of violence and will further the resolve of the resistance. And this continuation of military actions after Sinwar's death will underscore a critical point. The Israel-Hamas conflict is not merely about individual leaders or specific military operations. It's about broader dynamics of occupation, resistance, and overall transition towards a more just way of life for the Palestinians, which will not be denied. And for Palestinians, the death of Sinwar does not mark the end of this struggle, because the conditions that drive resistance, namely the occupation, the apartheid, the genocide, the blockade of Gaza, the lack of political and human rights, those will remain unchanged. Israel's military campaign, while claiming victories in the form of targeted assassinations, has not succeeded in quelling the broader movement for Palestinian liberation. One of the most significant critiques that I've seen is how Israeli and Western media often frame the conflict in a way that justifies ongoing military actions against Gaza. The media portrays figures like Sinwar. They focus on their roles within militant organizations, highlighting acts of violence and framing their deaths as victories and towards a pursuit of peace and overall security. And it's these portrayals that frequently ignore the larger context of occupation, apartheid, and genocide, and the systemic violence that almost all Palestinians face daily. The narrative surrounding Sinwar's death emphasizes his role in Hamas and his involvement in orchestrating the attacks on October 7th. What is often left out of these narratives is the fact that Sinwar, like many Palestinians, lived under the conditions of occupation and violence from an early age. He spent 2 decades in an Israeli prison, and during that time, he became a key figure in Hamas's resistance efforts. While his methods were undoubtedly violent, the media's focus on these violent acts without adequately addressing the conditions that led to it create a skewed understanding of him as a person. And it's these contradictions that arise in how events are reported. Israel reports suggest that Sinwar was hiding behind hostages during his final moments, a claim that was later completely contradicted by footage showing him fighting alone. And it's these kinds of discrepancies that raise questions about the reliability of all of these narratives and whether they are just being propagated to justify continued military operations against Gaza. The media plays a powerful role in shaping public perception, and by focusing on figures like Sinwar and the embodiment of this Israel-Hamas conflict, it can obscure the broader systematic issues at play, which is not an Israel-Palestine conflict, but an Israel genocide on Palestinians. You can say Israel-Hamas conflict. I don't think that you can say Israel. No, you can't. You just simply can't. That is the thing too. Like, I've seen people like Hassan draw a parallel between Palestinian resistance on October 7th and other historical movements, such as the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising during World War II. And I think that's a good one, because this comparison highlights the fact that resistance against occupation and oppression is a natural human response. And it's not merely the result of manipulation by any type of political or military leader. Just as Jewish resistance fighters in Warsaw were not simply terrorists, but people fighting for their literal survival and dignity as humans, so too are Palestinians engaged in the same type of resistance. It is a response to the brutal reality of an occupation and the face of a genocide. And so it's this historical context that I think is crucial because it challenges the simplistic notion that leaders like Yahya Sinwar are the primary drivers of violence and unrest in the region. Sinwar undoubtedly played a significant role in these violent acts and Hamas's military activity. The root cause of the conflict will always be Israel. What Israel does is what Hamas does is now 1% of 1% of what Israel has inflicted on the Palestinian population. And the roots of this go far beyond any single leader. The Palestinian struggle for liberation is driven by decades of occupation, apartheid, genocide, displacement, and the systemic inequality. And will continue, the resistance will continue for as long as those conditions persist. The broader October 7th was a jailbreak. Who are we to criticize how that comes about? Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of, this is the thing too that happens, is that a lot of people get mixed up with what happened and how it's not all attributed to Hamas. If you're going to put people in a cage and be violent towards them for decades, when they finally break out, yeah, they probably are going to commit a bunch of violence and it might be fucking barbaric. But what do you expect? And I'm not co-signing it. One, what do you expect? And two, it wasn't co-signed by Hamas. Hamas had an objective. Yes, they took hostages, but there's a bunch of other things that happened that weren't what Hamas was planning, right? Other people did things sporadically that obviously were not a part of the plan and were extremely violent, but that wasn't what Hamas was doing. It wasn't a part of their strategy. I don't think they're going to condemn it because, again, what do you expect? Violence reciprocates violence. That's what happens. Hamas did not just fall out of the coconut tree. They are the product of their context and all that came for them. So Israel's military actions are going to continue despite Sinwar's death. The media portrayal of the conflict that often obscures this deeper systemic issue at play will also continue. And it is the Palestinian resistance that will not be deterred because it's not about any one leader, but about the struggle that they face and about the fight for liberation that has been going on from decades, from the beginning of the occupation until now. It will not die. It can't be killed. What will kill the fight for that liberation will be their own freedom.